Welcome. I know it takes a few minutes for people to get logged on, so please stand by with us for a few minutes as we give a little bit of time for that for everyone. I'm Jill Dorfler from the Zaagibagaang group. You're tuned in with us live here for our Get Informed, Get Involved Watch Party series. If you can, as you're getting logged on, please say hi to us in the comment box. That way we know you're here, and also at the end of the evening session, we're going to be doing a drawing for gift cards. So we need you to say hi in the comment box in order to be eligible to be a part of that drawing that we'll do towards the end. Also, as those of you that have watched part of the series before know, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions and engage. So as we're letting people get logged on, I always like to read the mission statement for Zaagibagaang just to kind of remind us all of our efforts here. Zaagibagaang is a grassroots effort focused on governance and nation building. With our Anishinaabe teachings guiding us, we bring our gifts together to provide information and to work towards Minobamanaziwin today as well as for the next 7 generations. So as a part of that work, we've been working to provide lots of information about constitutions, mostly about the Minnesota Chippewa Tribe Constitution, but the last few sessions in our series have been models of sovereignty from our relatives to get some ideas about what other tribes have been up to and how their governing structures work, what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and getting a kind of a broader perspective. So you can find all of those resources, both from Minnesota Chippewa Tribe documents, constitutions, that type of thing on our website, as well as our YouTube channel, which has all of the live sessions archived there, so you can go back and watch them at any time. All right, so I'm curious to get a sign from my team. Everyone here at Fond du Lac is working behind the scenes to make this happen, and we really appreciate their efforts. And so I want to see if people are, from the team here, people are getting logged on, and it seems like the broadcast is going all right. I think so. Excellent. So more people will join as we go along, but that's fine. So as I said, I'm Jill Dorfler with Zaagibagaang. I'm serving as the host for tonight, and as I have for the last number of sessions, we're broadcasting again from Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College. We really appreciate the team here getting everything done for us. So tonight, we, as I said, are going to move into models of sovereignty from our relatives, and we're going to have Wayne Ducheneau share with us about the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. And so, like with our other sessions, I'm going to let Wayne introduce himself in a minute here, and then we'll move into some conversations about Cheyenne River's constitution, what changes have taken place over time for them, and we'll take your questions. So be thinking about those. Go ahead and put those in the comment box at any time. We'll work to answer and get to as many of them as we can. And then probably about partway through the broadcast, we may switch gears a little bit and talk about tribal governance more broadly, because Wayne's position is Executive Director at the Native Governance Center. Some of you who are watching are rebuilders and have been a part of that process and know Wayne from his variety of work. So we'll try to do all of that, and we'll wrap up by 7 p.m. So Wayne, I'll let you start out and give a little introduction of yourself.
Thank you, Jill. Haumatake chante nape chuzapi, Wayne Ducheneau imakchapi. Hello, my relatives. Excuse me. My name is Wayne Ducheneau. I greet you all with a good heart and a handshake. I am, like Jill said, enrolled with the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in north central South Dakota. Our tribe, our enrollment is a little over 20,000. We are housed completely within Dewey and Ziebach County in South Dakota, and our land size, we're roughly the size of the state of Connecticut, right? So it's 4 million acres, roughly a little more than half of that owned by the tribe or tribal members itself. So we are checkerboarded from allotments. We have jurisdiction issues, state, tribal, all that type of stuff. Yeah, and just truly humbled and honored to be here with you guys and talk a little bit more about Cheyenne River, our Constitution, how we govern, and then really excited to talk more about the Governance Center.
Perfect, great. So let's get started. And as we were previewing and prepping, you said you had a great story about the IRA. We've talked about IRA era constitutions. The Minnesota Chippewa tribe constitution started out as an IRA era constitution, and that's how Cheyenne River had their first constitution, and you have a great personal connection. So please share that with our viewers.
Yeah, so just a little bit more about myself. So, prior to coming on as the ED at NGC, I was on our tribal council back home where I served just shy of 4 years, 2 of those years as tribal chairman, or tribal vice chairman, excuse me. I've had, my father was a 2-time chairman of our tribe, president of the National Congress of American Indians. And then the story I have is about my grandfather, Franklin Ducheneau, who was a 4-time chairman of our tribe, plus served a couple terms on the tribal council as well. And the story I was relating was, so pre-IRA, our tribe had already established a formal council system. And we had at the time, dirt trails going through the reservation in the 20s and 30s. Our council reps would sometimes ride horseback 80 miles from one end of the reservation to the other, because our headquarters was at the old agency, which is now currently inundated with water from the Missouri River and the Pick-Sloan Act. And so the council representatives back then were committed to the work because they met monthly, rode horseback across the reservation, and got there. But the horseback story I wanted to tell is my grandpa Frank. So prior to the IRA adoption, he had understood, and it was his firm belief that we didn't need the Indian Reorganization Act to tell us that we were a sovereign nation, right? So he actually jumped on a horse and rode horseback across our entire reservation, going community to community, kind of rallying against it.
Which, when you consider the size of the reservation, I mean, riding horseback alone, but then when you consider the large size of the reservation, that's a strong commitment against the IRA.
Yep, and however, against his objections, the tribe held a vote and it passed. And so he then made sure to begin his political career by getting on the founding council, and really helped to shape and draft some of the language in the Cheyenne River Constitution, which, if anyone's a student of the constitutions back home in South Dakota, ours differs in many ways from some of our other sister tribes.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's kind of the little neat anecdotal story. The Constitution was first approved on December 27th, 1935. And then we've walked through.
Yeah, so pretty quickly. So IRA was 34.
Yep.
For those watching and remembering, MCT got their Constitution 36. So all of these happen pretty quickly after the IRA gets passed. They work. And so what are some of the features of that original Constitution? Maybe some that are sort of typical, and then if you have some that are, like you said, a little bit atypical as well.
Yep. So we, in the adoption of our original Constitution, under membership, which is Article 2, right? We didn't have a blood quantum. We had lineal descendancy. All those born that were on the rolls, like a lot of other tribes. Our governing body was composed of 15 council representatives, 1 chairman, 1 secretary, and 1 tribal treasurer. And so the chairman, secretary, and treasurer are all to this day voted in at large. And the council representatives at the time of adoption were from one of 13 precincts to make up the total of 15. So there were 2 of our districts that had 2 delegates.
2, okay.
Yep. And then also we had a vice chair. We still do have a vice chairman of the tribe. They are picked from within the council. So once the council election happens, the chairman, secretary, treasurer are seated. The rest of the 15 council representatives, the council representatives from themselves pick a vice chairman.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so really that's kind of some of the other unique things in our Constitution are around our tribal court system was established originally. We've had a tribal police force established in the Constitution since inception. And what was the last one? I can't think of the last one's escaping me for some reason. But yeah, so that's
It'll
kind
come back
of,
around. Yeah, excellent. So definitely like you said, some similarities there, but then having a court system and a police force established in that original Constitution, pretty unique, different than a lot of other IRA era constitutions. Do you know, were there term limits on elected officials in that initial Constitution?
No, there were no term limits, and then our council has always had 4-year staggered terms. So
Okay.
with the original
Yep.
seating, some were seated for 2 years, and then some were seated for 4 years, and thus the stagger began thereafter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Good. And then maybe I can have some assistance because my page still hasn't loaded here, but we can continue on to chat, and you can tell me the initial Constitution passed in 35, and then you had some amendments. At what time were the next changes made?
Yep, our first set of amendments came February 11th, 1968, and those were basically some more language around our judicial system, our court system.
Okay.
There was a set of amendments back in June 18th from 1980, and actually that was when our tribe, like I said, who was lineal descendancy from beginning, we had to pass an amendment that required 1/4 Cheyenne River blood quantum. And so there were a couple of other amendments at that time, but that was kind of really the main one.
Big change.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it really changed how folks back home, how we shaped our membership. It
Right.
went from, prior to that, us recognizing all Indian blood. So whether you were from Cheyenne River, Pine Ridge, one of our sister Sioux tribes, whether your parent was Anishinaabe or Navajo, we recognized all blood, counting towards the blood quantum. Back in 1980, when we prescribed a 1/4 Cheyenne River blood quantum, that really changed a lot of things. So then when you had marriages from outside the reservation,
Right.
none of that other blood quantum counted. And so you saw people that literally were full-blooded by our previous standards that then were half. Those that would have been previously half, if they married out, were then quarter. And it was really quick. People got to see that, just to several generations with this new system, that we were going to have, people that were unenrollable. And
Yeah.
so that, amongst 5 other amendments, I believe, in July 17th, 1992, precipitated our next round of amendments. And it was in those amendments, and some of this was a little bit controversial with the voting and the percentage and getting everything out. But in 92, amongst some other things, taking out some language around, some of our land language and changing that a little bit. The big one was then rescinding that 1/4 blood quantum.
So
and
it
taking that back
would
out.
change pretty quickly.
Yeah, in a matter of 12
yeah,
years, yep.
Yeah.
So it was a really engaging process at that time. In 92, I'm a freshman in high school, right? So
Okay, yeah.
I can remember sitting at the table, hearing conversations with my dad and uncles and other of our tribal elders then, talking about some of these issues. I remember a very specific one of our tribal elders talking, in front of the council. I heard the story where he was upset because it went from him being, or his grandchildren being enrollable to then that next generation after them, him not gonna, they wouldn't be enrollable anymore. So it was a really big, contentious set of things. Yeah.
Yeah, and enrollment is one of the biggest things I think that we've seen tribes across the United States struggle with, because it's that really big question of who are we and who belongs and how do we determine that, and that's hard. That's hard for any nation. The U.S. is struggling with that right now, right, in a lot of ways, and yet American Indian nations, we have that extra layer of colonization and U.S. influence that has brought some influence upon those changes. We've talked on this broadcast before about the Minnesota Chippewa tribe and how it was really a lot of pressure from the Bureau of Indian Affairs that eventually caused the Minnesota Chippewa tribe to adopt a 1/4 MCT blood quantum in the early 1960s. And the tribe tried to change it pretty quickly thereafter. And because of clauses for Secretary of Interior approval in MCT Constitution, they were unsuccessful at that time. Right now, we see tribes also removing Secretary of Interior approval clauses. What is the Secretary's role in your Constitution? Or has it changed over time?
It hasn't yet. It's
okay, interesting.
It's one of the things that, the Secretary has a lot of the same approval powers in our Constitution as in just about anything else, where they have to propose, or they have to approve resolutions that come up from the council, other things we adopt. They are supposed to approve our attorneys when we hire them. obviously they are approval through the secretary and how he obviously delegates authority down though,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
for land issues, easement issues, all those type of things. So we still are encumbered by the secretary's approval, you know, and it's one of the things that my father used to say, you know, nothing says sovereign like asking the secretary's approval. He
Goes
was,
back to your grandfather's point of
Yep.
like, well, this IRA kind of does actually diminishes sovereignty in many ways because it gives over this power and authority to the
Yep.
United States.
and the one thing my father did believe though, that even within this IRA constitution though, there was power, right? There was things that we could do, and so
Yes.
he was always a proponent for trying to change it as well as things moved along. But you know, some of the provisions in the Constitution really allowed for the tribe to assert jurisdiction, and it was oftentimes that, in a very joking way, when the tribal council was having a tough decision or you know debating a really important movement or issue for our tribe, he would oftentimes pick up the phone from his office, take a recess from the council,
Yeah.
and call the BRIA superintendent and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Warden, I need you to come down here and be our guardian," right? Jokingly, right? And the BIA superintendent at the time was a gentleman named Russ McClure. He was a longtime superintendent back home. And they ended up having a very tight relationship because he, I mean, Russ understood too, like that the tribe calls the shots on the reservation. And so, and there's no one who believed in tribal sovereignty more than my dad. So, but how do you work around those things? You still have to do it because this is our founding document and governs how we're supposed to operate.
Right, yeah. Great. All right, so it sounds like we're getting some people logged on. Feel free to jump in and ask a question. Definitely say hi to us in the comment box to be eligible for the drawing, which we'll do at the end of the session. So keep that in mind as you're watching. So, so your Constitution has gone through a number of amendments and changes over time, and really it sounds like the most recent change was in the
92.
90s,
Yep.
92. So actually it's been quite some time since anything has been changed.
And we've had a couple of different initiatives to try to do some change. When Chairman Joe Brinksplenny was chairman 3 or 4 terms ago, he'd actually got a grant to rewrite the Constitution. He worked with some attorneys. There was some money set aside to do that. I, in my time back home, had taken several cracks at drafting different versions of our Constitution.
Okay.
And just it was a lot of work and process trying to work it through the council. So before I left, though, you know, was just beginning to start to formulate that plan to get engaged with community and have that change come up through the grassroots, because research is showing that that's how you do most successful efforts around constitution reform have to come from community.
Right.
And it's really neat to look at Cheyenne River's other sets of laws and how, you know, some things in the Constitution then are interpreted really broadly. So we think about our election ordinance now, right? And so in the Constitution, it prescribes, like I said, 13 precincts by which we vote for members of our tribal council. We actually have an election ordinance that condenses all that down to 6 districts. And so, so it's a really unique thing where when the powers that be first adopted the election ordinance, they looked at the system of precincts as laid out in our Constitution. Some of those communities had, due to the flooding, due to other things, had kind of gone away, or, you know, and so how do we go about rectifying that, changing it so we can have a representative tribal government? So they adopted an election ordinance that then, like I said, condensed those precincts into 6 districts. And so back home, like we have 1 district has 1 representative, 2 districts has 4 representatives, and then the rest of the districts each have 2 representatives for the total of 15. It adds
Okay.
up, I promise.
Yeah. Is it based on population proportionally, or
it wasn't
geographically?
Yeah, it wasn't at first. I mean, and the spirit of one person, one vote, right, was actually most recently enacted back when I was the administrative officer for our tribe. So in the 2010 to 12 time frame, we actually had a lawsuit against our tribal council based on misappropriate or disproportionate districts, right?
Yeah,
and so we were sued in our tribal court system. It went up to our appellate court system, and our appellate court ruled that yes, the tribal council had to put a plan together to get more in proportion. And so I can remember being the administrative officer at the time. We had our legal team working on it, and and we did something where, census data at home stinks. The United States Census doesn't really work in Indian country,
Right.
at least in my humble opinion. And so there was no really great accurate way to kind of prescribe who lived where. So I can remember the legal team doing things like taking a picture of our communities from Google Maps in the air, and then having people who knew the community well come in and say, well, I know there's X amount of voters here. Like, so really, really rolling up your sleeves and trying to figure out best we can. And we ended up redistricting and redrawing these new lines that, with Eagle Butte being the center of the reservation and making up the largest population district with District 5, it's the smallest geographically, but largest population-wise, right? And then District 4, which then is the other part of Eagle Butte and runs from on the reservation north and south. When we redrew these lines to try to get it more in proportion, like we had to do carving, so gerrymandering basically, right?
Yeah.
Carving into the larger population sets to ensure that proportionate representation happened. And it's still to this day something that's still a little bit of burr in some people's saddles where, they were in a district their entire lives growing up, and because we had to draw this line to move the population around, their district was completely changed.
Yeah.
Yep.
They feel disconnected
Yep.
from, or they were literally disconnected from their
home.
previous
Yeah.
district.
And so add that on top of, right, our reservation already going through one movement when our, the riverlands were flooded out and people were kind of moved up and had to move then. It's a little bit of that history coming back to repeat itself. And so, but there was no good way. The other thing that our appellate court had done at the time was prescribed a timeline.
Oh,
right?
yes.
And so
it
in
had
order,
to get, which is good in a lot of ways, because these things, you could still be working on that project if a timeline maybe hadn't been pushed forward by the court.
And it was one of those things that, the council at the time very much believed in our court system. And so when the court made a decree and made an order, they did their best they could to live up to it as quickly as possible.
Good. Could you say a little bit about the court system and how, I think that's an interesting point to note, that it's been in the Constitution from the get-go. It has changed a little bit over time, but maybe just about how it works today. Are the judges elected? Are they appointed? Do they have terms? What's a little bit of the structure of how the court system works?
Yep, our judges are they're hired by the council, so there still is that oversight there. But that was I think that was the amendment in '68. It took out the right to appeal to the tribal council directly, right? So the appellate court was established. We have those things. So actually, our current system now is we have our lower court, and then the appellate court, which is a 3-person panel, including there has to be someone law trained on it.
Yep.
There has to be a tribal elder on it, and then the third seat is kind of just open. And the elder person generally, historically, hasn't been technically law trained, right? But someone with wisdom that they've added on. And so it's a fairly good system of jurisprudence. It, like I said, since the amendment that kind of took that council oversight basically away, it hasn't led to there were times in our history where, when court decisions weren't met well by the council, action was taken. Yeah,
that's what I'm curious if there, or if inaction, if a court made a ruling and the council didn't act on it, then was there a possibility for redress, or really just through the next election cycle?
There was, I want to be careful how I say this, right? There was, I think, avenues of redress taken, sometimes probably not the most in the spirit of a true separation of powers. But for the most part, like I've known, at least in the most recent history, specifically for sure when I was there on the tribal council and a little bit prior to that, it was really kind of settled. The courts made the decisions, and we've had, several of our court cases that have worked through our court system have gone up to higher courts and had some decisions upheld. The most famous of which was our tribal liquor license case, where back in the late 80s, when my dad was chairman again in the second term, our tribal council decided to establish our own liquor ordinance and make those entities, those establishments on the reservation that sell alcohol by a tribal liquor license as well as the state liquor license. And that case ended up going all the way up, right, to the highest levels of the federal court system, and we ended up winning. It was one of those funny things where this little town of Isabel, South Dakota, in the northwest area of our reservation, decided that their bar owners wanted to fight this thing all the way, right? And so
they have time and money apparently to deal with that, or they hate the tribe enough.
Well, and
the
my favorite
motivator.
story after
Yeah.
that, right, is then I have a first cousin who he went into the bar after the decision was made, and no one knew who he was really, and then someone asked who he was, and they traced back that he was actually my dad's nephew, and and he said then all of a sudden my beer got more expensive, right? So they didn't take the decision very well.
Right, right. Well, that's not overly surprising, but being that your tribe has had, quite a number of changes over time, do you know what helped push those changes forward, and what worked, and if there were other times, like you said, when the process kind of stalled, maybe some reflections on what might have been behind that as well?
It's definitely my understanding that, and throughout the entire amendment process, when the amendments were most successful is when it was driven by community, right? So that's, at the time, you maybe had a specific council rep or the chairman at the time who felt very powerfully about one thing or another, and then they would rally community around, here's what it says, here's why we want to move these things forward. And then like I said, when Chairman Bringsplenny got the grant money to do it, we tried to do it a little bit of a different way with having a group of attorneys come in and draft it first, right? And then trying to get that out. And that, not that it wasn't successful because it just didn't go anywhere. Like, I don't know what kind of fell through there, but it was mainly because the community wasn't engaged.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that community engagement is something that across tribes that have been trying constitutional reform, it's this key element, and yet it can be kind of elusive because Constitution isn't always a topic that everyone's excited to talk about. It's maybe, it's a governing document, it is legal in nature, and so there's some barriers there. And I think some historical frustrations with tribes too, with being able to change things, having the secretary have a lot of authority in some cases, and that feeling of disempowerment in some cases for people. So it's not surprising to hear that, from the Cheyenne River kind of perspective and experience, that community involvement and championing has been a key element as a part of that. Kind of a specific question here on the subject of pipelines.
Oh, okay.
This is a hot topic in many, here in Minnesota and other places as well. Question if you know, how does the tribal council or court system keep the tribe and surrounding communities safe from pollution? Are there laws that they can enforce that you have at Cheyenne River, or even if you have other examples, I think, and how have these come about?
Well, it's really about asserting jurisdiction, and that's one of the things, that tribes across the country have done in many different circumstances, whether it's, assuming federal jurisdiction to protect timberlands or manage river systems, right? In this instance with Cheyenne River and our sister tribes, Standing Rock to the north of us, right? From where that Dakota Access Pipeline goes underneath the river, right? It's our water. It's directly, if something goes wrong, it's going to directly affect our two reservations first, right? And so I think there's some movement now, especially between our two tribes, Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, about what can we do? How can we look at different avenues to kind of assert that jurisdiction so that we have the authority to be able to mandate certain things? It's my firm belief that because of the treaty, even through the Act of March 2nd, right, 1889, that established and the current 9 reservation system in South Dakota, right, our boundary is the eastern side of that Missouri River. And so I've oftentimes argued, if there's one drop of water left in that Missouri River, it belongs to the tribes, right? And so, but how can we be creative? How can we look at developing our own water codes, our own environmental protection laws, in order to not only replace but become stronger than current federal jurisdiction in regard to those type of things? And tribes have the ability to do that. It's shown throughout this country, and I think that's some of the stuff that we're starting to look to in both North Dakota and South Dakota, again, with Standing Rock and Cheyenne River.
So it's partly just developing the tribal law and codes with the environmental regulations, and then, like you said, as a process of jurisdiction and trying to assert that. And I think one of the big challenges is a lot of these cases end up in the end in federal court, and it's not a neutral court system. It's, you know, it's like it could be in the tribes court system or the federal court system, and these end up in the federal court system, which has a clear agenda and perspective. And so I think one of the other things that has been talked about and discussed in some different venues is, would there ever be the possibility, this is big picture dream thinking, right? Some other court system, some international court system where these things could be arbitrated in a more neutral manner.
And that's the dream, right? I know I was down a couple years ago at a Who Belongs conference at the University of Arizona Law School put on, and there was Matthew Fletcher and Winona Sengel from Michigan State University's law school talking about this idea of this kind of overarching indigenous court system, right? That would be like our world court, where instead of having to defer to the United States federal system, the system of Canada, the United Nations court systems, what if we as tribes banded together and form our own larger overarching umbrella system of jurisprudence that we could then take issues up to ourselves to have people that understand our values and our laws the best really help relegate down decisions and sort out disputes, right? And that, I think that's a heck of a dream to have, right?
Right, yeah, yes. Great, thank you.
The room's not spinning, that's the camera.
We're navigating a couple of things here, but thank you to everyone for tuning in and for asking questions. If you have other comments or questions, please join the conversation, and we're happy and welcome to talk through any variety of issues. There's a whole gamut of things that we can touch upon. So,
if you don't mind, I'd love to share. I was talking with you a little bit pre-taping or pre-airing, right, about my favorite clause in our Constitution, right?
Yep.
And it's in the Certificate of Adoption, right? And so it's after Harold Ikes, the Secretary of Interior at the time, says, by virtue of his authority granted, does hereby approve this attached Constitution and bylaws of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe of Indians, right? That's his first paragraph in the Certificate of Adoption. Mind you, and the very next paragraph, though, is something that I think is really powerful. And again, that's why if there's some attorneys watching, help me figure this out. Because what authority does a Certificate of Adoption have? Because the very next paragraph is, all rules and regulations heretofore promulgated by the Interior Department or by the Office of Indian Affairs, so far as they may be incompatible with any of the provisions of said Constitution and bylaws, are hereby declared inapplicable to the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe of Indians. And why I think that's so particularly powerful is because it doesn't say there's any wiggle room in there. It says any law that is in contrast to this Constitution and bylaws is inapplicable. And you think about the power of the Department of Interior at that time and Office of Indian Affairs over Indian country. At that time, there was no IHS system. There was no tribal road system. There was no. So all of our relation with the federal government stemmed from there, from the Office of Interior or the Interior Department and the Office of Indian Affairs. And so to me, as the federal government has further divvied out where authority lies with the tribes in all these different systems, so we now get our money from our housing money from HUD, our health money from HHS, our transportation money from the Department of Transportation. I would argue that any rules promulgated there
through those entities,
would be inapplicable because this is force of law. John Collier, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, who signed this, signed on behalf of the President of the United States at the time. And so I really think there's some power in that last Certificate of Adoption. And like I said, I understand that the IRA constitutions are boilerplate constitutions. They're based on Elks Club type things and all this different stuff, but
business kind of club type structure, a lot of them,
But that particular paragraph to me is just extremely powerful, and I would love to figure out how the heck we could use that to better assert sovereignty for tribes.
Right, and I've read a number of constitutions, and as far as I know, that's a relatively unique clause. Do you know if other have you heard of other tribes that have that same kind of language in the certificate of adoption?
There are most of the ones in the Great Plains in North Dakota, South Dakota.
Okay.
Those areas all have that similar certificate, but I think it was because of the joint effort of the Sioux tribes at the time.
I wonder if it was a regional.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, because you're right, I mean, as a matter of my work, I've tried to become a student of constitutions, and I've read, a couple hundred different constitutions now from across. I'm not an expert in any of them, but I've tried to read a little bit of a lot of them. And you're correct. It's a very unique clause, and I think there's I don't know if it's tested. That's again why we need some help.
Uncharted territory, which there is a lot. There is still in Indian law a lot of things that haven't been tested that are unknown, and I think that sometimes can lead to frustration as a part of the constitutional reform efforts and process, because a lot of times citizens have kind of technical questions. If this happens, then what? Or if X, and we can't always, there isn't always an answer to that because it hasn't been tested in court. And also sometimes even if something has been tested, it can go to court again and get a different ruling. And so there is always some uncertainty in how a clause may be interpreted, or how something could change over how it might be differently applied in one region versus another.
Well, and there's, shining examples of that, right? So for instance, the Bay Mills case, they went up to the Supreme Court a few years ago where their tribe took a bold step forward, right? I can remember sweating bullets waiting for that decision to come down, and I thought we were very fortunate for that case, came down on the side of tribal sovereignty. That's also the cool thing about tribal governance and Indian law, federal Indian law, tribal law itself, is because there's so much new still. It's steeped in precedents over hundreds of years, or a couple hundred years, as far as the federal system goes, right? From the Marshall Trilogy on up to the latest treaty case with the Crow Nation, right? There's all that depth and breadth of history, but there's also so much so new and so cutting edge. So if there's any young people out there, we need Native lawyers that believe in tribal sovereignty first, federal Indian law second. And so and that's something near and dear to my heart. I would always wanted to be a lawyer because I like to argue too much not to get paid for it. Law school didn't happen, politics did, and that's led to this job now, right? Where I still get to have some healthy debates with people. But that's the thing, that's why I so believe in tribal governance as a huge part of how our tribal nations can step forward, assert our sovereignty in new and different ways. One of my favorite videos we share in some of the curriculum at the Governance Center is one of the chiefs from Tanaha Nation talking about sovereignty as the shield, right? And often tribes view that sovereignty shield as something it's to protect. We're supposed to hide behind it, right?
Right.
And she goes on and talks about, well, actually a shield is a mechanism of war. It's an instrument of war, and we should be extending that out. It should be dented. It should be bloody. There should be brains on it because we're exercising our sovereignty with it, right?
Right. Yes.
And that's literally how I feel about tribes now. It's we are at a very great time in our history where, as we're becoming more sophisticated, as we're able to do these things, who else better to lead our people, to govern our people than ourselves? It's time to get rid of things like the Secretary of Interior approval and really move our nations forward.
Yeah. I think there's we're very like-minded on that, and several of our viewers are as well. In our tribes, individual people can have such a big influence and impact. And part of Zaagibagaang's effort is to help people have the resources to learn more about the Minnesota Chippewa tribe government, but then also about other governments. Are there other models out there? There's not going to be a single solution to any problem. But it's great to see what has worked and maybe what has not worked in other nations, and how, in fact, people can become empowered to make real change and to really make a difference. That's very, very possible if you're committed and you like debating and all of that. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Continue to say hello to us in the comment box in order to be entered in for the drawing, and ask us your questions. I'm trying to think of anything else. I know we're probably going to transition shortly from Cheyenne River, not that we can't step back to it, but we also wanted to spend some time this evening I wanted you to share a little bit of background about Native Governance Center, how it got started, what it is, and then we can talk about some of the projects you all have been involved in, and we'll take it from there. So let's start with that.
Excellent. So yeah, so the Native Governance Center, we're a relatively new Native-led nonprofit headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota. We are born of the work that the Bush Foundation had started in 2008 around helping tribal nations kind of through a nation-building lens as kind of research from the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development, right? And it was Joe Kaltz on my board. He's a Harvard professor in economics. You had Steve Cornell, who was a sociology professor in Harvard, I believe, right? And lovingly coined themselves the two geeky white guys, right? They were sitting around at Harvard University, really had a question about why some tribal nations were more successful than others, and decided, well, let's launch a research project on it, right? So they named it the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development and went forth and started going to Indian country and trying to find out why some tribes were more successful, like I said. And you know, they thought it was about economy. They thought it was maybe proximity to large urban populations. They thought it was, you know, access to resource. And what they really learned,
natural resources,
And what they really learned quickly was it was about governance, and tribal government, and the 5 nation building principles, right, which are spirited leadership backed up by capable governing institutions that have a strategic mindset and plan for the future, making sure that it all relates back to the culture, so a cultural match component. And then the 5th and last is to exercise our practical sovereignty, right? And so that's really been the same mantra that the Governance Center has really built ourselves around. So we took the work from the Bush Foundation, and it's really been our job to not only maintain what was happening with the tribes in this region, but our hope is to grow and expand it. And so, you know, we've done things like when I first got in the summer of 2016, I went on a 4,186-mile road trip. I went to 21 of the 23 tribal nations in the 3-state region and sat down with elected leaders and asked them, what could you use help with in the realm of governance, right? Is it, because when the Bush Foundation did it first, it was, you know, we need to understand this thing about nation building and we need leadership. And then the Native Nation Rebuilders Leadership Program was born, right? And so we took that very same mantra with NGC when I went out that first time, and overwhelmingly what came back is we need help around constitutions. We're in the midst of another Native Nations tour where we're going to go back out to all 23 this time. And it's some of the same things we're hearing. There's so many tribes now working on constitution reform in our region that's coming out as an overwhelming theme. How to organize your bureaucracy. How do you set up a government to be most successful? You know, oftentimes people think, you know, tribes are these big multi-million-dollar corporations and you should run them as such. But government isn't business. They're completely different and separate in how you should be looking at what type of lens. Business is about the bottom line and cutting throats to make profit. Government is about creating a vehicle by which our shared values are exercised through law to make sure that we are all taken care of, right? And so government's a completely different beast. And it's with the people in mind in first, not with the profit line in first. And so that's how we've really taken out. We are really building out our governance support work right now. It's something that we feel is really important because the leadership program is going so good. The Native Nation Rebuilders Program is 170 plus strong, intelligent, motivated, dedicated people in Indian country across our 23 tribes in the region. And we really feel like that's a well-oiled machine. So focusing in a little bit more on what we can do to help the tribes themselves is really important to us right now. So that's a little bit about the history, how we came to be.
Excellent. Yes, Native Governance Center has been involved in, like you said, a huge variety of projects, really well known for taking over the Rebuilders program. We have a number of rebuilders in the Zaagibagaang group.
Hi, Lorna.
And then also you all have supported a variety of different constitutional reform efforts, and you supported the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, as many of our viewers know, did a number of meetings. They called them, Constitutional Convention meetings, which were educational sessions, a variety. One on each reservation and one in the urban area, and the Native Nations facilitated all but one of those and created a nice report we have linked to on Zaagibagaang.com. Did an initial survey, and so that's an example of something that you all have supported.
Yep, and it was something that, again, it was truly an honor to be a part of. When the Tribal Executive Committee reached out to us to help, it was kind of a really neat thing. They asked a few people who could do this work, and one of the people that advised them said, well, there's this new organization, let's talk to them. And so we went up and had a couple conference calls and really kind of jumped into the fire in Mille Lacs at the first one. And we put together a program with our partners, the Native Nations Institute from the University of Arizona, and sat down and developed a 2-day agenda that was pretty much adhered to through all 7 of the meetings. There was one meeting where it wasn't, where the tribe at the time had decided that they wanted to do things their way. Again, we do nothing if not respect sovereignty. And so because that was their decision, we asked what we could do to help. We ended up transcribing the whole meeting for them, so that information could have been filtered in, or is in the final report that we gave to the TEC. We felt that was very important, that while we weren't there ourselves facilitating and gathering the information, we wanted to make sure that that was captured for not only posterity's sake, but to actually be usable for the TEC and the Minnesota Chippewa tribe moving forward. It was a really great project. The lessons Native Governance Center took and learned from that have really helped us grow in our current set of work. So we've had 2 other projects ongoing right now that are a little bit similar, and we've used lessons learned from MCT. One is the Oglala Sioux tribe is in the midst of a constitution reform as well. They came to us, the tribal council approved a resolution to have their constitution revision committee engage with NGC to do some work. But they had already had a plan put together. They had steps where they were going to do community meetings, a lot of like what Zaagibagaang has done, but built in a plan, and it was driven by some council reps and a few other people, right? And so they have just now completed a complete redrafting of their constitution. It's 50 amendments, and and the secretary, it's in they did through the petition process. So the Secretary of Interior is now sorting through, I think it was 4,800 signatures to make sure it was eligible for election criteria. There was, I think the threshold was only 4,000. So they built in extra to make sure they got it. And so, I believe that will go up to a vote for the people of the Oglala Sioux tribe soon.
Interesting, and I think that's something in the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. There's sort of 2 ways amendments can take place to the Constitution. Either, I believe it's 8 of 12 of the TEC members have to vote to bring them to the Secretary of Interior, or there could be a petition process. Can you say a little bit about the petition process?
Yep. So, and it's same with Oglala Sioux tribe.
They
had their council didn't want to do the process where the council put it up for a vote, and they tabled it back to a committee. But the people driving the reform were already in the process of gathering the signatures anyway, so that's why it's gone up. The petition process it's really clearly outlined in the CFR and 25 USC. And it's about going out, and you have to make sure the petition's all in the same form, it's in the same thing. You have a sign, print, date, time type thing. And it's really about going out and then just accumulating these signatures. And all constitutions that I've read, at least, have a threshold, whether it's, and it's those eligible to vote generally, it's a certain percentage. Like I know with MCT, it's 30%, I believe, right?
Oh, I think you're thinking of the election.
Oh, that could be the election.
So.
Here's where I'm not as good a student as the MCT Constitution.
No, that's fine. But there's a threshold. MCT has a specific criteria. I should have reviewed that just before coming on here, but there's a specific in that it's confined to a percentage of resident voters. I think it's 20%. But it's interesting because, of course, the majority of the population is actually off reservation, and so that sort of makes for, in some ways, a relatively small number that's needed in that case. And then when a secretarial election happens, then according to secretarial regs, you need 30% of those who registered to vote to vote. That's been something contentious in the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, and some people feel that 30% of those eligible to vote should be 30% of those individuals over the age of 18, which is the eligible voting age. And the Tribal Executive Committee passed a resolution to the effect of that's how they want to interpret that. So they want to interpret it a little bit differently than the secretary, which of course is fully within their rights to do.
And so like at Cheyenne River, it's in order to amend our constitution, it's 30% of those entitled to vote shall vote in election. And then the petition process for us, it shall be the duty of the Secretary of Interior upon presentation of a petition signed by at least 200 legal voters of the tribe. So that's a really way lower threshold.
Set a number.
Yep, it just set a number.
Ooh.
And so we have two different ways which amendment processes can take place. So, yeah.
Yeah, so actually, definitely a grassroots movement could develop really easily, relatively easily, 200 signatures if you have a body of 20,000 or so citizens, you said.
Yeah,
so,
and I think that's with roughly half on reservation, right? And then of that, probably, again, 60 or 70% 18 or older.
Older, yeah.
And so, so that's some of the other work we've done in the region is we do Nation Building 101 sessions where we go out to tribal councils, meet with elected officials, and then do usually 2-day convenings around the foundational principles of nation building. Generally, tribes at their request will have other specific things and they want flared in, and we're able to work with that and roll and do it. We had some work with the Yankton Sioux tribe where they had, again, a citizenship and enrollment issue where their business council was facing the wrath of the Unchis, and that's grandma in Lakota, right? And they were coming to their tribal council and like smacking them on the head and saying, why can't my Takoja, why can't my grandkid be enrolled? And so they engaged us to say, how can we do this? What can we do? And so what we were able to work with Yankton Sioux on is they had found a third-party person who they wanted to have come teach them about an enrollment process, amending their enrollment clause in their constitution, and then helping them develop an election or enrollment ordinance, excuse me.
Sure.
And so we gave them a grant and brought them in, but because that was a for-profit entity, the one thing we wanted to make sure is to bring in a tribal perspective so they could understand that tribes can do this on their own. And so we actually brought up a gentleman named Zeke Garcia from the Isleta del Sur Pueblo and Project Tiwahu. And Project Tiwahu, for those of you that don't know, Isleta del Sur is a pueblo in Texas. And they built an entire constitution reform effort around what does it mean to be Tigwa? So what does it mean to be a citizen of their nation? And so we brought up Zeke, who was able to show from a tribal perspective, here's some ways you can look at it, here's how you can engage. They had a quarter blood quantum at the time and were able to, their issues were they wanted to engage descendants on decisions. And so that's how Project Tiwahu was formed, how it rolled out. Actually, it was a Harvard Project Honoring Nations award-winning project. So there's some information there you can always find and look at.
Yeah, and we can share, sometimes after these broadcasts, I share related links on Zaagibagaang Facebook page. So maybe in this coming week, I can take a look at that Honoring Nations project. I think they maybe developed a short video related to that that I can share. So, and people can read more and learn more about it. So.
And so like I said, be on the lookout for us this summer.
Yeah.
We plan to have the trip wrapped up by the end of August. We're looking to connect with not only elected leaders when we go out, but really it's our hope to visit with them. And are there other stakeholders in the community we should visit with, right? So one of our newest initiatives is our Youth Rebuilders program. And that was piloted last year. We had a competitive application process and the Turtle Mountain Youth Council won the process. And it was one of those things where we hated to make it competitive. We hope to one day that becomes a service so that when a tribe,
any tribe that
they
within
want
the
it,
service area,
they want it, we're able to deploy it, right? And so, but the Turtle Mountain Youth Council won the application process. They were selected based on they had a really good organization already. They had a 25-year strategic plan and vision for their community, and so we were able in 3 days to bring really a kind of guerrilla nation building 101 in where we kind of fire hosed them the whole day, but we brought in Les LaFountain, who's a rebuilder, who is like this walking encyclopedia of nation building as it pertains to Turtle Mountain. He came in and talked about nation building from that key lens. Nice. We brought in Scott Davis, who is the executive director of the North Dakota Commission of Indians on Indian Affairs, and he talked about state tribal sovereignty perspectives, right? And then we did a couple other things that were really cool, where we brought in Mark Trahant, the editor from Indian Country Today, and Janie Parrish from Parrish Digital, and helped them around digital media, or digital organizing and social media presences, the power of data. And then the last thing we did is we partnered with Buffalo Nickel Creative, which is a PR firm out of Oklahoma, for the entire week to work on video production. And so at the end of it, they were able to produce a 7-minute video about the Turtle Mountain Youth Council, what they're trying to do, and then these 4 satire videos that are like a minute long that they want to put out to help dispel some negative stereotypes in Indian country, and it's with
Nice.
it's with Bobby Wilson, who anyone who knows Bobby, he's with the 1491 comedy troupe,
Hilarious.
and they're great videos. So visit the Turtle Mountain Facebook page, Youth Council Facebook page, and you can see those videos. They're also on Native Gov's YouTube site.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely look for those and share them. We've shared some information about the Youth Council in the past, but
Yep.
I don't think I've seen those short satire videos. I've seen the other ones, so we'll have to keep our eyes
Yep.
peeled for those. And what's nice about that youth initiative is also getting people involved at a young age, empowering them, getting them to learn those concepts early on. One thing that we found and that we just know is for many of us, we weren't really taught anything about tribal government when we went through public school. Some of us eventually learned, more in college or read things ourselves as we liked of interest. But we have to empower ourselves. We have to take control of our own education process and be willing to dig in and take advantage of opportunities and create just get out there and make opportunities in some ways as well.
Well, and think about leadership and education from a historical perspective. So, right, prior to Western influence, leaders were selected by deed, not popularity.
Yeah.
And youth were involved from a young age at learning what their roles were going to be in society. So they always had a job, they always had something to do. And so really the Youth Rebuilders is about that, instilling in tribal youth this power that they can be leaders even at a young age if they can, if when they excel, when they step out, that they're going to be listened and heard. And the Turtle Mountain Tribal Council, to their credit, take a lot of lead from the Turtle Mountain Youth Councils. It's really a cool symbiotic relationship.
Excellent. We have talked a little bit about citizenship in a couple of times this evening. Kind of a question here. Let's see. I wonder if any tribe would consider a person not from the USA or have a process to become a member of the tribe like the USA has for citizenship.
And I'm not sure.
Those are two different questions. So first, I'm not sure either if a tribe would ever have a person not from the U.S. become. We have a number of tribes that are divided across the border. Do you know of any?
Well, I listened to, and I can't think of her name, but she's the current chair of the Spokane tribe. And she talked about in their historic context, their first role included Spokane Indians, Indians, natives from other tribes, non-Indian people, because they were believed if you were living in and around and productive in their society, you are part of their nation, right?
Sure.
And you
a
have
more contemporary idea of how we think about citizenship today.
And naturalization is a part any functioning government has. I mean, to be able to naturalize someone who's not born a citizen of your nation and give them rights and access as a nation, it's something that every other country in the world does. Tribes someday may get there. I know Tribes
historically did that. So it's interesting to think about, would tribes ever go back to that process where if an individual was living in the community, was I think it's a two-way process, right? Because it's both the tribe recognizing the individual as a citizen, but then anyone who becomes a citizen, as we've talked about in a previous session, that extends the tribe's jurisdiction and acknowledges the tribe's sovereignty. And so it's a interesting question.
Well, and then you have a tribe like Asada del Sur, where they don't, a lot of our tribes, if you're enrolled in their tribe, you can only be enrolled in a tribe. And if you want to move your citizenship, if you have the ability to be flexible, you have to unenroll from one to unenroll another.
Right.
Down in at Asada del Sur, they don't care. You can be enrolled in multiple tribes with them. It's just the other tribe and their perspective, right? So that's almost a form of naturalization where they're recognizing thunder and lightning and lights going out. So
right.
Sorry about that.
No, that's every once in a while, just navigating a few technical things here this evening. So I lost my train of thought briefly, but I was thinking of the naturalization process. So it's something, yeah, that tribes had historically that is definitely something that could be considered for future. It's a whole different track than blood quantum and the kind of influence that the U.S. government has had, which has primarily been to see tribes decline in population. That would be a whole way that tribes could possibly hugely expand in population and in jurisdiction. Numbers connect to political power and other variety of things, but it's a balanced process as well.
For sure.
So interesting.
Yeah.
So I think it's a beautiful evening out in Minnesota, and we have had a few people tuning in, which we really appreciate, and we know that a number of people will probably tune in. What will happen later, about a week or so from now, is we'll archive this video and we'll have it available on YouTube. But I'll have you select, this is a good night to win. I'll have you select 4 numbers between 1 and 7.
Right, and so now I'm going to feel horrible for the 3 people
Now,
who
whoever
don't
doesn't win, please email Wayne personally. I'll be giving out his cell phone number. No.
Right, so just to be, so it's not as random, I'll go all the odd numbers. I'll go 1, 3, 5, and 7.
All right.
So sorry, 2, 4, 6.
Oddballs win tonight.
We'll have some NGC swag.
Okay.
Get a hold of us. I'll send you some NGC swag.
Excellent. So thank you so much for being willing to share your perspective and joining us this evening. And we'll look forward to seeing you around at events across Indian country. We'll share the rebuild. You all will be recruiting a new cohort of rebuilders.
So yeah, application processes will open up in July. Please come look at us on the web at www.nativegov.org. We're on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Come find us there. It's really a movement we hope to grow. You don't have to be a rebuilder. You don't have to be a tribal elected leader to help us carry out the mission to help tribes grow their capacity to exercise sovereignty.
Awesome. Miigwech. All right. Thank you, everyone. Until next time, Gigawabamin.